to start with acknowledging my co-authors and the Sapien Center of Excellence in Bergen, Norway. So my talk takes you into the African Middle Stone Age, which is a time period between 300,000 and roughly 30,000 years ago. And it was a significant time period of human behavioral evolution. And within this time frame, the period of 125,000 years ago up to 50,000 years, roughly, is even more significant in terms of indications of behavioral development in Homo sapiens. And what do I mean with this is that we have indications of people developing behaviorally and their cognitive abilities, and these are things like, for instance, using jewelry like these shell beads, or using geometric engravings, early signs of symbolic thinking. And with all these, there are two key areas within Africa where a lot of evidence of behavioral evolution occurred. One of them is South Africa, and one is North Africa. And you can see here Middle Stone Age sites from South Africa plotted against the aridity index, and Middle Stone Age sites for the North African region against North African biome maps. And you might think that what you see in a pattern is actually that in both areas, interestingly, these sites seem to be clustered around coastal areas. And we still have to I think, answer that question if this is or was really the case, or if this is an excavation and a preservation bias. In both of these sites, and also in other areas of Africa, we actually still don't really know which environments were associated with the evidence of behavioral evolution in these sites, because we're facing a couple of obstacles to actually make a smart climate-human interaction case. And some of these obstacles we are facing are, for instance, the dating uncertainties in archaeological sites are obviously huge, so are they in the climate records. Another obstacle is that we're sometimes lacking the climate records in the areas we would like them to be, or in a time period we would like to study. And also, who has worked in South Africa especially knows about the spatial heterogeneity of climate patterns in this area. So basically, if we are not using the climate records from really nearby the archaeological sites, we might end up aligning climate patterns with archaeological evidence that is not actually true. So for this, we kind of still struggle to answer large-scale questions like if climate change caused regional or rather large-scale cultural shifts in the African MSA. So one way to get around some of these obstacles is actually to produce the climate records from the exact same layers the archaeological findings come from. Because these same layers contain ancient plant remains, so-called leaf wax anacanes, and by analyzing their chemical composition, we get an environmental signal that is related to rainfall and biomes. I have applied this in a South African and a North African framework. And here you can see me in Blombos Cave sampling the archaeological strata. So what you do is you extract the biomarkers out of this sediment you get from the archaeological sequence. And what you're measuring is basically the waxy surface of these ancient plants. This is a SEM picture with the waxes on top. And what you get out is an anacane distribution, for example, that gives us an indication of the plant groups. And you can also analyze the isotopes of these anacanes. So these are the carbon isotopes that give us an indication of if we had a C3 or a C4 vegetation around, or the deuterium isotopes in the first order approximation. We assume that the deuterium in the waxes represent the deuterium of the precipitation that the plants took the water from. And in the community, generally, a depleted signal is interpreted as weather conditions in the deuterium, and on the opposite, an enriched signal is interpreted as an arid signal. So I hope with this we're all on the same page now with the methods, so we can look at some results. So we're starting in South Africa. Blombos Cave is a site that is located on the really southern tip of South Africa, here marked in a red star. It's about 300 kilometers from Cape Town, and it is a key site from the South African archaeological record that has provided us with a lot of evidence of behavioral evolutionary evidence. It has sediment from like 5E to roughly 68,000 years ago, but the human occupation in this site was actually not before 100,000 years, also until 68,000 years. And what we're finding in this site is examples of complex behaviors such as engraved ochre, bone tools that were also engraved, again the shells I mentioned before, perforated shells, and really a lot of bifacial worked stone points. And if we look here at the sequence of Blombos Cave, the oldest layers are on the bottom and we're getting younger to the top. This is the lithic, like the archaeological assemblages abundance is plotted here against time and where the leaf wax samples are located in comparison. And what you should remember is that basically with time from the oldest to the youngest layers in Blombos Cave, we find more uniform complex culture, and with time the evidence of material culture is diversifying and getting more complex. So here are the results of the anarchane distribution for the site. What you're looking here at is the relative abundance of all the Blombos samples I measured in black against a reference database of the fine boss vegetation that we find there today. To give you an impression how this looks, this is a fine boss vegetation in the area. And what you can see in the plot is that we're actually getting a good match between the modern soil distribution of fine boss versus the Blombos samples. That tells us that we're doing a good job actually matching the vegetation we would expect in this area. So with this, I'm moving on to the deuterium isotopes. What you can see here is the deuterium isotope notation against time, with time running from left to right, against a global sea level record, and what we're showing here is from roughly 95,000 years to 60,000 years. And what you hopefully can pick up is that with time, we're getting a signal to enriched values in the deuterium record in Blombos Cave with a lowering in sea level. And as this is a proxy, we have multiple options how to interpret this. So one option is that this was actually indicating a decrease in precipitation over time. It could also be related to increased evapotranspirational processes, for instance, with longer, drier summers, or changing rainfall seasonality. So basically in this area, we would move from a winter rainfall-dominated system into a summer rainfall-dominated system without changing actually rainfall amounts. There are other options how to interpret deuterium, but for the interest of time, you just have to believe me that they're not relevant for the site. But to interpret the data further, we have actually used climate model data output, and this is my colleague Ozan's talk that comes right after me. So we use a downscaled global model for regional modeling, and we use 2 time slices, 82 and 70,000 years. And what we wanted to understand is what is the influence of sea level changes in the area with a high stand and a low stand scenario on the regional climate. And this is motivated by data that has actually happened in real in the south coast of South Africa, where high sea levels, Blombos Cave is located on the ocean, and when you have low sea levels, you expose a significant land area, and this site is further away from the ocean. So basically we check with the model what is the influence of the hydroclimate for these 2 scenarios, also to interpret our data further. And what we find, and here you have to concentrate on the right-hand side plot. So this is the anomaly from the 82 slide minus the 70,000 year slide, and we're looking at precipitation. And the darker colors in brown shows you the precipitation decline, and the opposite colors, so the green colors are showing an increase in precipitation. And what you hopefully can take home here is that over all seasons, moving from 82 to 70,000 years ago, we're actually getting a reduction in rainfall in these coastal areas where interior South Africa becomes wetter. So we're getting like a contrast between the coastal and the interior area at the same time. And this is caused because we're getting like a reduction in the amount and in the frequency of rainfall in both rainfall regimes. But we're also getting more enhanced evapotranspirative processes because the summer temperatures are higher. And we're having also weaker westerlies and a potentially colder Agulhas current, so we're getting less moisture being transported from the ocean into the area. So with this, we can interpret actually our data in a way of that we're getting more continental and arid conditions with glacial conditions when the sea level is low. And this goes in Blombos Cave at least together with increased evidence for complex culture. So moving to North Africa, and you might think what do these two areas have in common? So I would say they have a lot in common. First, they have sediment in these time periods. So this is a photo from 22 when I was at the excavation of Contrabanderas and Dar es Sultan. I have sampled and analyzed the leaf waxes, and these are also MSA sites that span roughly stage 6, stage 5. It goes also has LSA occupation, but here we're interested in the MSA, obviously. So MSA occupation is from around 126,000 to 95,000 years ago. These sites have been associated with a lot of homin fossil founds. Here is the skull from a child that was found in Contrabanderas in 2009. And such as in South Africa, we find a lot of evidence of shell material for complex behavior, also a lot of bone tool industry. So again, I'm plotting my samples on the sequence, so you have an indication where in the archaeological strata we are. So these are 3 pilot data points I got 2 weeks ago, actually. So this is a first test, and I'm happy to see that this works. Again, the same plot layout as before. We have time running from left to right and the deuterium isotopes against the sea level. And basically what we're finding is that the deuterium is associated potentially with weather conditions in 5E and a decreasing trend towards the younger substages. If we look at the carbon isotopes, we're finding not much change, so the time period is associated with sea-free vegetation with no major changes. If we move to Dar es Sultan, same plot layout again, where the samples are sitting in a sequence. Here we have 2 MSA samples and a later Stone Age sample in a deglaciation. Again, very similar picture. We have a wet 5E and a decreasing trend in humidity and a potentially more humid LSA sample than even 5E is. The carbon isotopes, stable, sea-free vegetation, not much change. So this is good news. So we're seeing stable vegetation, but variability in the hydroclimate. And with this, I have a lot on the last key slides here. So the keynotes are to take home for you in orange, and the white parts are basically the climate dynamics, explaining the things. What you should remember is in South Africa, with increasing glacial condition, we get more coastal aridity and continentality, and that, at least in Blombos Cave, goes together with increased complex behavioral evidence. If this is a coastal-wide feature, has to be shown. For North Africa, we see at least humid conditions associated with 5E. That's something we would expect from the area. I have found some older literature that suggested that these sites in North Africa were only occupied during humid phases associated with C4 grasses that the hunter-gatherers were following. From my data, I'm not seeing this right now, but we need obviously more data points from the sites. And with this, I'm happy to take any questions.